Welcome to Quest Xeon. This is Pastor Scott Conway, or Grandmaster Scott, or Scott with one T, or lawyer, or what, however you know me. You know I've got a crazy resume. Well, a woman I met has an even crazier resume. When I first met her, I had learned that she was Lisa Yeung, MD. So I knew she was a medical doctor. Over the course of that first session that I met her at, a 3-day event, we found out she also has a PhD in psychology. Okay, so she's a medical doctor psychologist, Dr. Lisa Yeung. Well, then we found out during the second 3-day event I was attending with her, as she was explaining something that she had learned while she was the medical director during the pandemic of a clinic in the Bronx. I go, well, okay, so medical director, MD, psychologist. And one of the things we do in this particular business group is we use a lot of dating metaphors when it comes to doing business. And so we talk about, like, a partnership is a lot like a marriage. Closing a sale is a lot like how people develop a relationship and land in bed with someone, where I get what I want by giving you something that you want, ideally. And then, the pickup artist thing of, well, I'm just trying to get what I want and I'm trying to overcome your objections, and how the hard sell works. And so we use a lot of these metaphors. Because we use the metaphors, we get very comfortable talking about sex much more concretely, just actually about sex. And we were having one of these conversations in some social time. And I had paused because I was concerned that Dr. Lisa, who was fairly new to our group, might not be comfortable having all of these discussions about, pretty straightforward, blunt talk about sex and stuff surrounding sex. And she's, oh, no, I'm also a sexual blueprint coach, so I'm totally comfortable with the subject. And the whole table stopped like, what? What are you talking about? What is that? Now, the main point, of course, she was making is, oh, no, I'm totally comfortable with the topic. But it was yet another opportunity for a revelation bomb about who Dr. Lisa is and how absolutely amazing her background is and her certifications are. And we've got her here today. So it's not just sex according to Scott, that we've got someone who has some expertise in a particular model, the sexual blueprint. And in that particular group, half a dozen of us decided, that this sounds fascinating. And so we went and we took the quiz and we moved forward so that we could learn more about sexual blueprints in general and our own sexual blueprint in specific. So doing me a great favor, and I'll tell you, considering how busy her schedule is, this has taken a long time to arrange. We've been trying to set it up for over a month. And so I've got a little bit of time with her, and we've broken it up into 2 quick interviews. And so I'm going to dive in with me and Dr. Lisa Yeung talking about the sexual blueprints and what it means. Now, by way of model, she's going to use love languages as an example. And of course, we know love languages around here. If you've been under my teaching and tutelage, especially if you've been through the Yori system of understanding love languages, or the Yori system of understanding temperaments and personalities. And so if you know the idea with, like, our powerful and playful and precise and peaceful temperaments, and from those temperaments, knowing that there's a positive side and a negative side, the positive side you probably want to cultivate and do more of, and some of the negative side of the things to watch out for and maybe try to do less of. That the sexual blueprints work similar to that. And of course, if you know love languages, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, meaningful gifts, and words of affirmation, and you understand kind of the idea of that model of this is a way to express love and connect in love. That sexual blueprints are doing kind of a sexual version of this, a sensual version of this. And of course, I've taught the whole Awesome Sex program, and we've been through a number of subjects, and that bringing in a fresh voice with a fresh perspective, and in particular, a feminine voice, talking about this as a medical professional, as a psychologist, as a coach, as a woman, and just, showing up with so many things about her that is not the same as me. So it's not just, sometimes people can get the sense it's just one man's perspective. And so we have an opportunity now here to have Dr. Lisa Yeung join us. And I'm very excited that I finally got to connect with her and was able to bring her here for you to be able to have this conversation about sexual blueprints. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the interview. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lisa. Now, before we begin, is there anything about, how about you summarize your credentials and we'll see if there's any more surprises that I don't already know that is relevant to the discussion. So you tell us just really quickly who you are. So everyone knows from you, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Scott. There's a lot of different parts to my story. Very basically, I'll touch on a little bit of it. I'm a family medicine doctor, and I was a medical director on the front lines of the pandemic in the Bronx of New York. And most recently, through my own personal journey, personal development journey of overcoming burnout and depression, and really a lot of trauma from my childhood, and just different experiences that I'd gone through. Now I am an integrative coach. And so what that means is basically I use my background from medicine, from my degree in clinical psychology, as well as different modalities that are more spiritual and work on a subconscious or subconscious and unconscious level to heal and energy work. And all of these things, all these experiences and tools that I've learned from both the medical side and also personal development, spirituality, and holistic side, I pull all together as I now help people. So I help successful people who may be burned out, may be overworked, may be stressed, maybe not feeling fulfilled or truly aligned with who they really are, find themselves essentially to overcome all of these challenges and to live their life even more fulfilled, to live a life where they're feeling aligned authentically, both in their personal and business and professional life, and which then in turn allows them just to feel more alive and more them, and be successful in all areas of life in the way that they define it, not in the way that society defines it. So that's what I'm most passionate about now. And I work with one-on-one clients, and I do talks all over the world, virtually and in person. And I guess that's a summary of what my part of my story anyway. So thank you, Scott.
Yep, and I won't be surprised, and I suggest no one else be surprised if casually during the conversation any other revelations show up that make you go, wait, what? Because that has been my relationship with Lisa so far, is practically every time we're together for a meaningful amount of time, whether it's in a prolonged conversation or at an event, some little nugget just casually shows up, which is how we got on the subject of sex today. Is at the table, we were having that conversation, and I was personally concerned that Lisa, being new to the group, might find it a little uncomfortable, and she just casually drops like, well, I'm an erotic blueprint coach anyway, so I'm okay with all of this. And we all said, wait, what is that? So that it's so much of how I've gotten to know this woman is what one revelation at a time. But I will tell you, half a dozen of us, as a result of that little snippet of a conversation, went and took the test. And I found it so intriguing that I have been after her to try to find a time we could get together to be able to record this for you. And so, Lisa, if you could share with us what erotic blueprints are, kind of big picture, and then we'll dive in a little bit more into each one individually.
Awesome. Thank you. So erotic blueprints, first, a very zoomed out description of what they are. I like to draw us an analogy to them and love languages, which I imagine most people have heard of the love languages. So essentially the erotic blueprints, just like the love languages, is another framework for which to better understand yourself as well as your partner, and to improve your relationships, right? And so just like the love languages, there's different categories. There's 5 in total of the erotic blueprints. And the point is that we all embody each of them to a different level. It's not like that we are one category and that's it. And just like the love languages, we all appreciate all the different love languages and receive and give them in different ways, and appreciate and have them to different degrees. The same thing with erotic blueprints. And the whole idea is, the most important thing before we even jump into any of it is, whatever your blueprint is, there's nothing wrong with it. You're not broken, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. So because part of it is, which is what you're doing here, Scott, and thank you for doing this for this group, right? And I'm happy to be able to talk about this topic, is that sexuality, and I this is what I experienced growing up too, is such a taboo topic, and that carries with it so much shame and guilt, that then it leads to a lot of dysfunction. It's an important area of our lives, just as spirituality, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness are important. Sexual wellness is also important, but it's kind of like the black sheep of the family that's not talked about and taboo. And the erotic blueprints allows us to normalize that conversation, that this is an important part of life. In fact, it's an essential part of life, because if you're not fulfilled in your sexuality and your needs aren't being met there, then it's likely to ripple in every other aspect of your life. And so that's why it's important. And also to understand that you may be different from your partner or other people, and that's okay. And the erotic blueprints allows a framework to differentiate some of the differences and make them all okay. And so that's a basic overview of what they do. And it's a very powerful tool for us to understand ourselves, to better understand our partners, and also to enhance the relationship between us and our partners, right? And in the way that I've seen couples who were on the verge of divorce, they think I'm just sexually incompatible. It's just nothing's working. He wants this thing, I want this thing. It's just incompatible. And when you start to actually dive into the erotic blueprints, understand it, and use it as a container, as a framework from which you can communicate with each other and also heal different wounds from the past, then come together, then relationships become much more alive and improve in ways that the two people may have never imagined possible before. So it's super powerful on many different levels. And I'm sure there'll be so much for us to talk about, but we'll keep it to top level first.
Yeah, I know it's tough, because anyone who's been a part of my teaching for a while already knows that there is a 12-lesson series on awesome sex. So we're not going to be able to thoroughly unpack all of this. And even just on love languages, when I'm doing a 6 to 9 lesson set on love languages, you can imagine with something as intimate and not talked about as sex, we could do a dozen of these sessions and still be unpacking stuff. What I'm going to ask for is the names of the blueprints are energetic, sensual, sexual, kinky, shapeshifter are the ones on my list here. And we're going to get a really quick overview. And by the way, similar to when I teach on temperaments, powerful has a positive aspect and a negative aspect. In this case, it's the superpower and the shadow. Is that what you call it in the blueprints?
Yes.
And so we'll talk about powerful, playful, precise, and peaceful, and the ways it shows up that you probably like and are proud of, and the ways it might also show up that you might want to watch out for because you may want less of that. There's a variation on that here. And so if you could, pick one of the five, and we'll end with a Shapeshifter, because I find that one perhaps most fascinating, because that's what I tested out as. But we'll talk about that more next time, as far as like how it would apply to like a real person, using my test as an example. So pick one to tell us about what it is, and the superpower and the shadow, just by way of an example to begin with, and then we'll continue on into the other four.
Okay, sure. So as Scott said, there's 5 categories: energetic, sensual, sexual, kinky, and shapeshifter. So I'll start with the first, the energetic. So the energetic, there's so many aspects of it, because it's a whole embodiment. They might talk a certain way, they might behave a certain way. So all of this, and interact in a day-to-day life a certain way. And so just to let you know, there's so many ways in which it shows up in life outside of the bedroom, outside of sexuality, that's important to also be aware of. And that's like sort of a few layers deep that we won't go into just now. Energetic blueprints, someone who has a high energetic, they're very in tune with emotions and energy, and sense everything, especially energy and emotions in their surroundings. And the superpower of the energetic is that, well, let me just take a step back. The energetic, what the typical presentation of an energetic is, that they are aroused and turned on, and they love anticipation, longing, yearning. So with the energetic, they in fact more distance or more time and space, and that yearning, that foreplay almost, is what turns them on and gets them more aroused and ready to be in a more intimate and sexual interaction, right? That's the superpower of the energetic, which is very fun to explore. It may not sound believable to some of you, and for me, I was very skeptical in the beginning, but now I can say that it is absolutely something that is a possibility, and I've experienced it myself. Is the energetic superpower. Energetics can have orgasms without even being touched.
Mm-hmm.
And so imagine you don't even have to touch your partner, and they're having an orgasm, entire body shaking, right? That is one of the superpowers of the energetic, and it's very powerful. And it's the type of orgasm where it's almost like a wave, and it's just wave after wave after wave of pleasure. The shadow.
Will that include things like, phone sex or cyber sex with the partner? So if you can't be together physically, that you can still have sex long distance while you're apart.
Yeah, so I have experienced this long distance, and like physically miles and cross countries and things like that. And so yes, it is absolutely powerful, and it is something that a lot of people may not be super in tune with. So there are ways in which, as a coach, right, I would help someone, no matter who you are, even if you don't test as energetic as your strongest, tune into the energy so you can start to feel it, right? So these are all things that are within us that we can enhance within ourselves. And yes, absolutely, it would be great for people who are long distance relationships to be able to play with that. And sometimes it takes some learning and enhancing and training of that to get to that level, to be able to experience it across the country or anywhere in the world.
All right. And you were just about to share the shadow side before I dove in and said, whoa, hang on.
I can't help, like, I feel like I'm just throwing out whatever's coming to mind, right? And I'm just sharing what's coming to mind. And there's a lot there.
Well, and in particular, I appreciate the throwing out that whatever comes to mind is just part of the idea of sex is something you just talk about, and you have like actual real conversations because it's a subject. And in particular, certainly as a lawyer and as a pastor and as a counselor, for decades, sex and money are two of the top most common issues that are doing violence to relationships. And yet somehow we can't talk about money like it's math, and we just don't talk about sex at all. We'll complain about it, we'll joke about it, we'll make these little quips about it. But I love the fact that we have this model. So energetic shadow side.
There's also money is also another taboo topic, and there are whole other frameworks called, for example, the sacred money archetypes, which also is super fascinating, helpful as a side note.
Oh well, okay. Now, people, you remember the thing that I told you about that's like, oh, boom, there we go. There's another aspect of Dr. Lisa.
So the energetic shadow potential. So we say superpower and shadow, and you can exhibit both of these. And it's possible that as you're listening to this, you may hear parts of the energetic shadow or the superpower of another blueprint for yours. What part of it is just, this is all just information. This is not to be used as a way to judge yourself or your partner. It's not to be, I would say, not to be used as something where you pigeonhole yourself and say, well, I'm energetic and that's it. And I'm just like, this is who I am, right? So the beauty of having frameworks like this, like the love languages, like the erotic blueprints, right, is that we get to understand ourselves better, but the purpose is not to pigeonhole ourselves into any one category, and to understand that's all a spectrum. It's all evolving as we evolve as individuals. So you might take the quiz now, and then 6 months later be very different because of things that have shifted in your life. And so just having grace with yourself. If you say, oh, I'm just seeing the shadow, I exhibit the shadow of each of these, and why don't I see the superpower? That doesn't mean that that's going to be the way it is all the time for you, especially as you start to dive into this information more and be more open to discussing it in forums like this, or working with a coach, whatever it is that your path is, then you can heal. I think the main thing is that sometimes we think we're broken if we don't even know what an orgasm is, or there are a lot of women, who feel like, who have never had orgasms, and to think, well, I must be broken, maybe I just can't, right? Or if you notice some of the shadows that I might talk about, and you realize, and you think, well, I just have all the shadows and I don't have any superpowers, that there's something wrong with me. No, it's just that you are the way you are now because of things and experiences that you've had leading up to this. And it doesn't mean that it has to be this way forever going forward. And there's steps that you can take to heal that, and to lean more into the superpowers, and into a more fulfilling sexual and personal overall wellness in life. So I just wanted to make sure to say that too.
Yep. And hopefully those who are more consistently under my teaching have constantly heard that all this is about insight, it's about understanding, it's about starting points, and that when you're looking for where changes may want to be made, you always look at yourself first, and you're going, my wife needs to hear this stuff. It's like, well, okay, let's start with you first, because you're the one that's here. The most common complaints I get from people who come in for counseling say, well, why didn't you tell my husband what he needs to do? Is it because you're the one sitting in my office?
Yes.
Okay,
And
so on energetics, superpower and shadow.
Yes. So the superpower is that they can sense energy and emotions, and also, like I said, in summary, have orgasms without ever being physically touched. And the characteristic of the energetic overall is that they are turned on and aroused by anticipation, by yearning, by longing, right? And that actually gets them more turned on. The shadow of the energetic is that if you come on too strongly, too quickly with them, they can shut off entirely. Meaning they could have been very aroused, very turned on, and then somehow, we'll understand this more as we go into other blueprints, if someone comes on too strong to them, then suddenly they will completely turn off, not interested at all, and shut down completely. And so this is, I'm also sharing the main superpower and shadows. There's more to it, but that's probably one of the main ones that people experience, and they don't understand why. And it's often that there are couples where if one person is energetic, the other is not, and they don't understand this framework, especially if one is energetic and the other is sexual. This is a common pairing in relationships. The sexual wants to jump right in, the energetic gets shut off, and then the sexual feels totally rejected and doesn't understand, well, I'm kissing her and I'm touching her everywhere. Why is she now not interested and not wanting any sex at all?
Well, I can imagine the frustrations. Like, you said yes, please 10 minutes ago. Now what? I'm not interested.
Yes.
Okay, so well, I guess on the way to the sexual, is the sensual kind of in between those, or should we just jump straight to the sexual?
We can talk about the sensual and then we'll go through that order that we first described, just to keep it consistent for everyone listening.
Okay.
So the sensual is the next one, and the big picture characteristic of the sensual is that they are turned on by all of their five senses. So sense and smells and beautiful things. So anything that they can see or hear or smell or taste, or like certain touch, like really soft, fluffy things on their body, those turn them on. So all of their five senses they get turned on by. And so one of their superpowers is that they can also have orgasms, not in your, like just from one of their senses, like being touched behind the knee or having a delicious piece like of chocolate covered strawberry in their mouth and they can orgasm. So that's a simple way to describe the sensual.
And then the sensual superpower and the corresponding shadow.
So I would say the superpower is that they can have orgasms that are not limited to just being touched in their genitals, right? And so it's you could give them a chocolate covered strawberry and then all of a sudden they're having an orgasm, or touch the back of their knee in a certain way and all of a sudden they're having orgasm, which is not what most people think of in terms of giving someone else pleasure. And the potential shadow, the most common one for sensuals, is that they love beauty so much that they can get in their heads. So they are the ones that can, in the middle of having sex in bed, they know that the sock is on the ground, and then their mind can't get off the fact that there's socks on the ground. And then all of a sudden they're in their brain and not in their body, not experiencing the pleasure, even if their partner may be doing all the right things, but they're in their mind and now totally taken out of that experience. And so that can cause them to not experience pleasure in that same way, because they're in their head about something that's out of place in the room, or out of place or smelling off right in the room, and then therefore kind of shut down in that way.
Oh, and then all of a sudden they're paying attention to like to-do lists and like, oh, as soon as we get done with this, I need to this and the that and the whatnot, and they miss what's going on now. They basically they've left the here and now and they're into something else somewhere else.
Yeah, and often it's something in their senses that's off, right? Like, so that's why I say the sock example of the ground. Like, most people be like, who cares, there's a sock on the ground, we're having sex, right? Like, and they just can't help it. It's just how they're wired, right? Again, it's not anything wrong with them, it's just how they're wired. And so understanding that you could be, as your partner, right, you can imagine you could be doing all the right things that usually get them to orgasm. And get orgasm is not even necessarily the goal, but a lot of people feel that way, right? So get them tons of pleasure and get them to orgasm, and then one day you're doing it and it works and it feels amazing, and then another day you're doing it and you're like, what's happening? It's not working anymore, right? And it could be just the socks on the ground that is bothering them, that they aren't aware. And so you can imagine how even the little bit that I've shared with you so far can help you understand your partner, not feel rejected, and also see how you can optimize situations so it's pleasurable for both of you. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. The sexual, then an overview superpower shadow of the sexual.
So the sexual, description of the sexual is that they love sex and the traditional way, sort of, that it's portrayed in the movies of sex, of penis in vagina sex, right? Genitals and genitals touching sex, intercourse. That's what they love the most. And so they're turned on by naked bodies, they're turned on by porn, they're turned on, and they really love the orgasm. So that's really there in their mind. Intercourse and orgasm equals sex. That's it, right? And so for the sexual, their superpower is that they often can go from, let's say a level of 0 of being turned on, like 0 to 60, 0 to 100 in like split second. They can go from not turned on at all to like super turned on and ready to have sex right away, super quickly. And so their level of turn on can be switched by just seeing someone naked walking by or seeing a picture, and all of a sudden they're in the middle of doing work and they're like, oh my God, now I'm ready to have sex, right? So that's a superpower of theirs. And the shadow, one of the potential shadows, is that sometimes they can get so focused on sex equals intercourse and sex equals orgasm that they lose out on the rest of the experience. Right. And they don't see and understand that it's the foreplay, even before bodies or lips are touching, right? It's the experience of the pleasure leading up to the actual moment of orgasm that can be so pleasurable and so enjoyable that they miss out on. And often this can cause tension in relationships where they're just pushing so hard for that orgasm. That's what they're driven by the results, right? And not the journey. That can turn off their partner. And they may not understand that their partner actually needs something else. And they just don't get it. They're like, well, why do we need to bother with foreplay? Why don't we just get it done? So that's kind of a potential shadow of the sexual blueprint.
All right, and then I've got some activity going on just outside the office window, so I don't know how much of that is bleeding into the audio. So I will just turn it over to you about an overview of Kinky and its superpower and shadow of Kinky.
So in terms of the Kinky blueprint, first, the description of Kinky is enjoying and being turned on and aroused by anything that is taboo for you. So the clarification here is that Kinky is different for every individual person. For someone who it's not necessarily what you see and think of when most people think of the word kinky. People think of what they see in the movies, 50 Shades of Grey, right? Like chains and whips and dungeons. It could be kinky for someone. And having sex in a position that's not missionary style could be kinky for someone else, right? Or having sex with the lights on, it could be kinky for someone else. So really, there's a huge spectrum of what kinky is. And the key is, what is kinky for you? Meaning, what is taboo for you? What makes you feel like it's taboo for you and a little bit uncomfortable for you? And if that turns you on, then that you may have some kinky within you. And the thing, so the superpower of the kinky is that you can imagine, since there's this huge spectrum, right, that I described potentially, there are endless possibilities in terms of, especially when someone embraces their kinky, because it's often, as I'll get into, something that people are afraid to admit. They have a lot of shame around. And the kinky blueprint is often one that is repressed or suppressed. And the thing is that there's nothing wrong with kinky. It's actually a very fun place to play. And the superpower is that you have all of these different things that you can play with. There's endless possibilities in terms of pleasure, because anything could be pleasurable if it's taboo for you. And so when someone starts to embrace and step into their kinky, it's very exciting, especially as a coach, to see that, because it's also about reclaiming parts of yourself that you have shamed or blamed or made wrong. And so you can imagine how that ripples into reclaiming parts of yourself in other areas of your life, right? The Erotic Blueprints is a framework about sexuality. But the secret is that it's not just about sexuality. It applies and ripples into every other aspect of your life. And that's why it's powerful. People come in, like I have clients that I've worked with that come in because they think they want to work on sex. Mm-hmm. And then the transformation that they have in their relationship and how confident they are as an individual person, and then therefore how they're showing up in their business and with their relationships, all of these things, that is the transformation that they get that they don't realize when they come into it for sex. I got a little bit like carried away. So let me think. Oh, the shadow of the kinky.
Shadow of kinky, yes.
Thank you, Scott. So the shadow of kinky is that they often have a lot of shame and around what they enjoy, right? If they have something, certain fetishes or certain things that turn them on that they don't believe are socially acceptable, they have a lot of shame around them, and therefore they're afraid of fulfilling their needs with their partner, even with themselves, because they feel like it's wrong, they're bad for even thinking or wanting that. And so that is the biggest shadow of the kinky.
Yep. And in our next talk, I will bring in like some of the business and the other outside parts of it. But to wrap up for this chat, shapeshifter, what is a shapeshifter? And then what and if we could go in reverse order, the shadow side of the shapeshifter issues, and then finish with a superpower, so we end on a positive note.
Awesome.
We wrap this one up and then kind of cue up the next one.
Awesome. So the shapeshifter, the overall description is that they enjoy it all. So all of the other 4 categories that I described, they enjoy it all. And so it's not that it's a little more complex than that they are each of the blueprints, but for now, we'll just say that they enjoy it all. And so their shadow is that they often might feel like they're too much. They enjoy it all, and very classically and typically shapeshifters have an insatiable thirst and hunger and passion for sex. And they could go for hours and hours and hours and want even more, right? And so and they enjoy all these different aspects. And so they can often feel like, especially in someone who is not a shapeshifter, if that's their partner, they may feel like they're too much. And so they may feel like they want too much, they're too much in terms of sexuality, and therefore shut off from that. And also, as a result, they are sometimes can forego their own needs in order to satisfy their partners. And so their partners may be super satisfied, and they may still be starving and hungry and thirsty for more, and not feeling safe enough to share that they want more, because they feel like, well, I'm asking for too much. And their superpower, so related to that, is that they are amazing lovers, right? And they are able to speak basically all of those 4 other categories. They're able to speak in all of those other ways and fulfill their partner in whatever they need. And the fact that they have this insatiable thirst and hunger for sex, and also a desire to please their partners. And that I could go on for hours and hours. So does that help in terms of a summary?
Yes, well, and you're mostly considering that we have a limited amount of time. This is not like a 3-day training event where we have all of this time to unpack and all of this extra time to do Q&A and to dive into each of them and break up into breakout rooms to like deal with the individual one. I mean, I can just imagine when the full-on trainings of these are going on, there is so much depth.
Oh my gosh.
And in large part, as you know, I cover my masculine sexuality program, talking to men specifically about uh, the sexuality common to males. Is the more this stuff kind of like grows up in darkness, the less we talk about it, the more it is just all over the place because we have no frame of reference. We have no model to even understand what we're doing and what we're feeling and what we're craving. So I appreciate this as kind of an introduction, and then we will take kind of a more application. We will unpack like my particular quiz, which, well, we'll talk about that in the next one. So thank you very much, Dr. Lisa. I
Awesome.
appreciate having you join us for this conversation so that it's not always just Scott talking about stuff Scott knows. I love tapping into your mastery and your expertise. And so I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
So,
And may I say that I appreciate you inviting me here, and I hope that in hearing just the overview that your audience here in this group, one, hopefully you don't feel overwhelmed. It is a lot of information. I've thrown in a lot of information, and the basic is that it's a framework to help you understand yourself, especially in the form of sexuality. And so we have alluded to the quiz multiple times already today. And if you want to take the quiz, there's a free version and there's a more detailed report. You can go to blueprintquiz.lisayeung, YEUNGMD.com, and go take your quiz before our next one so that when we talk about more specifics, then you can really apply what we're talking about to the results that you got.
Yeah, and for anyone going to the quiz, the free version will give you like your one dominant. So I took the free version first, and it told me this is the thing, and gave me a quick overview. And then I went and paid just a few dollars. It's a really inexpensive quiz process to get my percentages all worked out, which we will be talking about in the next session. So if you go take your quiz, whether you just do the free version or invest just a few dollars to take the more in-depth version, and if you're a couple, each of you take it separate without reference to your partner, and just take a look at your own scores separately and individually so you don't feel any pressure to conform to an expectation. And that way you can discover rather than try to conform. And we will unpack my own report in our next session. I trust you can see why I was so excited to be joined by Dr. Lisa Yeung to talk about the sexual blueprints. And you can see how seamlessly it works with the entire Yori system, how it fits in with the way we think about love languages, with the way we think about temperaments, and of course, making sex normalized. One of the things certainly we ran into a lot for those of us who are into counseling or coaching, or lawyers for that matter, dealing with marriage and divorce issues, is how often sex is one of the issues. And as you saw in the session, I learned a new thing about some of her particular training in dealing with money issues. Because, of course, money is math and is one of the other big two issues we see manifest in multiple ways that is relevant to divorces. So in order to have powerful, intimate relationships, having a greater depth of understanding, and the Yori system is you, others, relationships, intimacy. And of course, a big part of intimacy is covered in our awesome sex program, has to do with that sexual connection, building on the complete intimacy in all of the non-sexual ways. And being able to understand these blueprints, even just with this cursory overview, I think is a tremendous leap forward. Ages ago, there was a counseling ministry that was really focused on trying to help couples stay together. And what they found is their control group of the groups that didn't come into counseling at all, and those who did come into counseling, still had the exact same divorce rates. What they found had the greatest impact was the study of temperaments, which we do with the powerful, playful, precise, and peaceful. Closely related to that, as I've heard often taught as a game changer in relationships, is love languages, which includes quality time, physical touch, acts of service, words of affirmation, and meaningful gifts. Well, several of the sexual issues, I believe, can be addressed and with the sexual blueprints, and that this can then become a framework from which to be able to have conversations, a framework from which to develop. And so we can start with what we learn about ourselves, start with what we learn about our partner, and build an intimacy that we can share that will be powerful for both of us. And I think that if we can deal with this, and we can deal with this in an intelligent, understanding, wise, insightful, and loving manner, that this can be transformational for relationships. And just like in my Awesome Sex program, the Awesome Sex 1 is starting off with using the program as a basis of conversation so that we can communicate, so we can talk about sex like sex is a thing to talk about. So we hope you've enjoyed the first part of this interview with Dr. Lisa Yeung. We are not done yet. So come back next time, having hopefully taken the quiz, and we will unpack the results of my own quiz and work forward from there.